to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Happy little music in the background is Sonata by Domenico Scarlatti, one of the lesser known composers of the in-between area between the Baroque and Classical period. We're going to kind of continue in the same vein as last one. That's why I left the Star Trek image up, because we're going to be talking about souls moving through the multiverse under the guidance of karma. I'm going to call this how the anointment of karma drives the Messiah game. And we're going to kind of continue in the same vein as our last discussion, trying to make it a little bit more clear how an individual player in the game of souls, presumably anyone who's listening to this, would navigate this game in practice. How to live the life of a soul in many incarnations. Okay, let's dig into it. I'm going to use the same graphic that I used most recently, this new one, to kind of talk you through what's going on here. Okay, so the multiverse has many universes, some of which have been fully tested in previous versions of the multiverse. Some of which are still under test in this Gaia experiment. This little test tube that constitutes our special solar system here. Let's talk about how this interface works a little bit, because we haven't visited that in a while, and that may not have been clear. How does this Gaia experiment get isolated from the rest of the multiverse? Okay, well, the Gaia experiment exists in this Luciferian prime universe. It's the universe of testing. Experiment is a test, a final test of this new version of karma, which we are all participating in that test. If you're listening to this, it's because you're one of the participants in this final test, which involves final chosen species, Homo sapiens. As such, there is a boundary that we live within during this test. Until the test is complete, souls that advance, let's move back to this other graphic, souls that advance to spiritual or God level experience within this new version don't get to actually get out of that test until the test is complete. This is the origin of the idea of the so-called fallen angels. Those who are participating in this experiment don't get to play in the old version of the multiverse unless they stay outside of the experiment. And this is how these older souls who earned their own universe of creation, who operate their own universe, are prevented from gumming up this experiment. They are playing their own games within the same universe, but they haven't been able to penetrate this boundary of this experiment. How is that boundary set up? It's set up, again, as part of this experimental setup. It's a microcosm of the bigger experiment. So this microcosm has a version of Lucifer that, rather than embodying the boundary of the Luciferian universe, the whole Luciferian testing universe embodies just the boundary around this Gaia experiment, keeping anything from inside from getting out. within the experiment, there is also a bound that keeps the newly earned gods, the souls who have reached the level where they might have their own universe, from escaping and actually having their own universe and operating in the greater multiverse. That's what you got to do to keep an experiment isolated. If we let rats out of the cage before the experiment was done, we might be unloosing a demonic force on the multiverse. That would not be something we want to do. We've done plenty of that in the past, and if at all possible, we want to keep things isolated. That isolation chamber is essentially bounded by the incarnation of Lilith within this experiment. This anti-creative force that's trying to keep things contained doesn't want the newly created, the newly earned gods, the elevated souls in this experiment, to be free. And so you've got basically Lucifer working to try to keep the souls outside from mucking up the experiment, and the Lilithian descendant sort of keeping the new gods, the new angels and so forth from escaping, and by sort of keeping them on ice in a virtual reality where they're practicing what they're going to do, but they're practicing it kind of in this experimental containment lab that doesn't allow them to have full access to whatever power they would have if they had their own universe. It's a very limited kind of power. And this is essentially what's happening when souls are incarnated here. And you've probably known a few of these souls that seem to have some sort of special gift. Everything they touch turns to gold. If they start a business, it's just successful. They make a bunch of money, and then somebody buys the business just before it crashes. They seem to have this Midas touch. You've probably seen influencers like that who get on social media and are just wildly successful, where hundreds of other people doing the exact same thing fall flat on their face. It doesn't seem very fair. It's not. Those souls are kind of giving the opportunity to take advantage of the system. And this is how we, while we're testing, are also not only testing this latest version of karma, but we're making sure all the souls that are stuck within this experiment have already been graded, so that when the experiment is done, we know where to place them and how to sort them karmically from what's already out here. Okay, so there's a range of universes here that play more or less by God's rules or by the adversary's rules. They're more or less authoritarian. They're more or less considerate of the rights of other souls. And there will be, when this experiment finishes, many souls that are, okay, based upon your performance in this experiment, you're going to be released to this universe or that universe, or you're going to be recycled to Borg, or you're going to be turned over to one of these hive mind universes to be used and abused however they please. And that's going to be based upon your performance and what sort of spiritual worship you have, what sort of beliefs you have. Now, we know if you go around and talk to a lot of people, there's just a huge range of beliefs that people have. All the way from, I don't believe in anything, and I believe that this is all just a dream, simulation. We're in the Matrix or something, and I can do anything I want because it doesn't matter. And those kind of people are dangerous. They will not respect the karma of others. They will use, abuse, take advantage of other souls to get what they want in their current incarnation. Okay, if they have exhibited very, very dark karma, they may, and of a particularly strong nature, they will probably attract the attention of one of these dark god universes. Maybe even as dark as a hive mind, and with the idea, okay, you would make a really good hive mind queen, a subordinate queen to the hive mind leader of this whole universe, who would be basically lording it over the worlds that we control in the physical universes as they existed thus far, as they existed outside this experiment. And this is essentially the worst of the adversaries' minions, if you will, outside of the Gaia experimenter of that variety. Hive mind queens running a variety of planets, even whole galaxies controlled by a hive mind type structure, very authoritarian leadership that basically dominates through mind control. That's what a hive mind is. Then their movement is sort of a function of, let's talk about how it was in the last version of karma. So the last version of karma allowed God-level creators to participate fairly freely in the physical universe to achieve what they wanted. Say where they're sort of like super players, if you will. And their interactions with this physical universe were not as limited as they will be when this new version of karma finishes up. That's why it's taken so long to test and release this new version. It has to have been proven to basically limit even God's ability to interact in the physical universe. Basically will subject all of these gods and goddesses and highest level consciousnesses to working through karmically non-sinful manner within the prime universe. May have other universes that are parallel, which they can affect, but they'll be working on copies of what's in the prime universe, not on the original. So it will sort of be more of a matrix type version of the prime universe. And if they can attract souls there to their parallel universe, they can do whatever they want to them, work with them, abuse them, use them, whatever, in that other universe, and that will be basically their way of interacting with the physical world. So they will basically be able to have their own version of, quote, heaven, and their own version of purgatory, to work with the souls that happen to worship that particular entity or thing. I mean, it's not necessarily a god or a goddess, it can be an idea. There is a whole universe that represents the idea of communism, for instance, that is the god of that universe. There's a lot of spiritual energy wrapped up in ideas like that. And who's the god of that universe? I don't know. It maybe is some version of the soul that was Karl Marx. Maybe not. I don't think that Marx was the first one to invent the idea of communism. It's an old idea that's been used a lot without giving it the name. It's just been made into more of a science, more codified, if you will. It's got a more distinct dogma than it did in our species before. But again, we're not the first chosen species of this experiment, not by a long shot. In fact, there were chosen species before this latest version of the Gaia experiment that have explored the whole universe using a different set of laws that allowed them to. And this is something that's you got to understand about how gods have evolved. There was a time in our history when gods had a lot of spiritual power and were able to manifest it, and they were able to use that power to instantiate themselves, to transmigrate themselves very easily between universes, between places within the same universe. That's no longer as easy as it was. That's why we don't see gods in our midst fighting in our skies and throwing thunderbolts at each other. What we may see are technological gods, kind of like the Numby-Gumbies of science in our own species, who are not averse to playing with fire and the karmic consequences of that. And there are still a lot of those souls in this universe and even in this little microcosm who we know are causing a lot of problems because this experiment is not quite finished. What's going to be required for it to finish is for a number of messianic prophecies to kind of come to fruition. And those prophecies can be thought of religiously, but they're actually kind of boundary conditions of the experiment. And again, the main one that you need to be aware of is that God himself has to pass the Messiah game, has to advance to the highest level, to a 12th level awareness, consciousness, the highest God level of consciousness, in a new way, having gone through the whole process again with a new version of karma. And so, whereas God's previous Messiah appearance may have been as a very powerful, spiritually effective being, a god, if you will, in our traditional view of what a god was, with a lot of arcane spiritual powers, the ability to melt rock with their mind, to move things telekinetically, to control other beings through their mind. That was an older version of what gods could do in this physical universe. That's not going to happen anymore. Okay? It's not going to happen anymore once those souls take on this new version of karma, which is going to start spreading outside of this experiment. And that will basically bind them. It's in a way, it's almost like this experiment will become like a big bang within a big bang. Essentially, that's what happened with the Big Bang, is the earliest version of karma spreading, and the game of souls starting with a very simple set of rules that, basically allow players to play a cosmic version of Pong, if you will, creating stars, bouncing stars off against each other, cosmic pool, if you will. That was the Big Bang version of the game. A lot of the pieces are still in play there, but that's not where the most interesting experience is anymore. The most interesting experience is one that plays by the latest set of rules, the latest laws of chemistry and physics. If you can think about it, it's just a more challenging game. And if you want to play those old games, there are saved games of the physical universe where you can choose to incarnate and have a very simple version of this game where you get to be an old style god throwing planets around and playing in that mode of operation. And that might be something that somebody would want to do. That's why we have games like that that human creators have invented to sell and have people pass the time. You're not doing anything that hasn't been done before. Much better than it's implemented by your average human that's just looking to make boodle of cash in this one incarnation. You're not thinking beyond this incarnation. You're not thinking about the consequences of what you're creating. If you only focus on what you're doing in one incarnation, you can accomplish a lot in that incarnation, but you might pay for it in future incarnations. And this is why you need to keep karma in mind. The most successful souls in this experiment, especially at this end game, are not necessarily going to be the ones that are going to be the happiest with where they're assigned in the future. They might be. I mean, there are universes out there, if you're lucky enough to get pulled into one, where it's kind of run like, there's a universe where gambling is a good thing. And the souls that go there spend eternity gambling. Of course, it wouldn't be fun unless there were losers, so some of them in that universe are perennial losers. And, that's a pretty bad experience for a gambling addict to be in a universe where that's all everybody does is gamble, and you're the universe's worst gambler. That's the hell of that universe. In order for that hell to exist, there have to be other souls there that are just incredibly successful and seem to always win. And those are kind of like the demons, the devils of that universe, of that hellish universe. And, even the winners get tired of doing that. If you know you're always going to win, it's not really gambling anymore. And they get bored and they get unhappy there. And when they get unhappy, there are different ways they can handle that. They could get jaded and decide, I don't want to play this game anymore. And that's when they go from that universe to a more hive mind universe. Help, I want to escape from this. I want to go to nirvana. I want to forget everything. Take me, take me. And of course, there's probably some hive mind that will look at that soul and say, yeah, just kill yourself and come to us. You will be one with our everything in our universe. And this is basically how souls in hellish universes, eventually they either move on to something even more hellish, giving up their identity, if you will, or they could choose to karmically do something positive. Well, okay, so instead of just winning over all these other players, I'm going to start teaching them that gambling isn't a good thing. I'm going to maybe give away my money, give away my earnings in this universe to these poor people that never win, and somehow try to cure them of gambling. Try to make a little microcosm in this universe of something more karmically positive. So, in a sense, that kind of a person in that kind of a universe would be doing what we're doing on a big scale with this Gaia experiment, making a little microcosm in that universe that doesn't play by that universe's rules, that tries to teach something different in that universe. Now, that might not be something that's very popular with the God of that universe. The God of gambling might see those souls as revolutionaries, and at some point, basically kick them out of their universe, effectively kill them, eliminate their ability to live in that universe. And that's when karma would take over and say, okay, you don't want them in your universe, gambling God. We'll see what other universe might be interested in them. And if they've had a pretty good idea, like developing a Gamblers Anonymous for the gambling universe, that might be something that could be tested in the physical universe. So they might give them a chance to incarnate here and see if they can carry that principle to something that has enough value that, it makes them of interest to other universes. Maybe they combine this gambling 12-step program with a new religion, and that religion takes on, and it's becomes a version of Christianity that especially appeals to addictive type souls. I think there are versions out there. There are special sects or groups that make that their main mission to, basically deal with people who have various kinds of addiction. Okay, well, that might get them involved in a different universe after they prove themselves. Again, every time you want to change an assignment, you don't just get to generally jump from one heaven to another. You've got to earn it. You've got to prove through physical incarnation that you deserve a different chance, another path. That's how karma works. And so basically your behavior in whatever universe you're in gives your soul a karmic signature. Again, we call that the Merkaba. You start radiating a new Merkaba frequency. Not a single frequency. It's not something simple like these high vibe nuts talk about. That's a religion you're free to pursue, but it's a very simplistic religion. There's not one single frequency that you have. You're not a photon of light that has one frequency, okay? A soul is a complicated thing. It's made up of all of the experiences, all of the thoughts you've ever had, and the resonance of those thoughts, some stronger than others. A soul that's highly specialized in creation of music is going to have musical thoughts, and those will be the strongest thoughts. And musical universes, musical areas in the multiverse are where they will be attracted to. That's how karma works. It's not a one size fits all. It's not, I've got to have my highest vibration and then I can. That's really nonsensical. It makes sense for elementary particles. It makes sense for individual photons, and perhaps that's where you came from. Maybe you have a resonance for that kind of religion because you have a photonic background. You were a light being, a very light being with one frequency. Okay, if that's where you want to go, knock yourself out. You can be a photon. And you can interact with things in a photonic way. Very simplistic life, very simple incarnation. If that's what you hanker after, that's what you'll get. There was a version of the save game where that was the biggest game in town. And if you like playing photon games, you know, they're probably in the multiverse any number of particle accelerators that have an incredible need for photons to exchange energy. And they will be happy to let you have your fantasies of high frequency as they design higher and higher energy particle accelerators. Maybe that's why there's such an interest in high vibray, because we've been making higher and higher energy particle accelerators right here in our own universe in this Gaia experiment. The CERN needs a whole bunch of photonic souls, and the demand has created resonance that is encouraging that religion. That explains it for me. I can't understand anybody being that narrow-minded, simple-minded, and naive to follow this really silly, high-vibe New Age religion. It's a very low-consciousness religion. And as I told you, this first level of spiritual consciousness, the fifth dimension, if you will, that's where the whole fifth dimension idea comes from, is the first glimpse of spiritual awareness. It's not the highest consciousness at all. In fact, if you have this first level of spiritual consciousness without a good grounding in physical consciousness, that can be a very delusional place to be as a human incarnated soul. To be more aware of very basic spirituality than you are of the physical limitations and the rules that you operate within, of physics and chemistry, and the boundaries, especially the boundaries of karma. You could be a very, very dark, deluded soul, a very misleadable soul, a very corruptible soul. And this ties back again with the idea of what's going on here with anointment in this game. Okay, you can be anointed by any soul in a spiritual form. In this microcosm of an experience, we've been anointed by the souls that are like looking to tag new souls for new godhoods that didn't exist previously. And there's a bunch of new godhoods needed because we created all sorts of things within this experiment. Not only did we final test this new version of karma, but we created languages that never existed before. We created sciences that never existed before. We created art that never existed before. And those souls are all encapsulated here. That knowledge is isolated within this experiment. And not completely isolated. There are observers of the experiment. Those observers are the senior creators that have not chosen to play the game yet. They're still playing on the original version of this experiment, the beings of pure thought up in this highest heaven of senior creators. Okay, well, the ones that haven't chosen to play the game have been able to only create within their mind since recent versions of the game. If they are going to create anything and test any of their ideas, they have to test them by participating in this system of reincarnation and karma. So these observers are kind of like multiversal couch potatoes. I like to watch kind of souls. They've been watching this experiment and they have their favorites and so forth. In order to anoint a favorite, in order to have an influence on them, they have to use spiritual energy. That spiritual energy has been limited until recently. As this experiment finished up, the veil has been lifting, and Lucifer, as the tester of this universe, so the version of Lucifer that bounds this whole physical universe, the prime universe, is an AI. It's a previous version of Lucifer that was released, replaced the old boundary universe, Lucifer, the ruler of this whole universe. So that was a major version of Lucifer. There's a minor version of Lucifer that is a copy of that, who is kind of the bounder of this, the tester of this whole thing, keeping things in, keeping this membrane active. And that soul is a major version of another soul that's actually around doing stuff. And as I've told you, one of the doing stuff versions of Lucifer within this experiment is the Archangel Michael. That's the most successful version, the most godly version of Lucifer that's come out of this experiment. And that is the one that at the end of this experiment is going to replace this Lucifer as the bounding force of the whole physical universe, who's not going to allow dark gods to participate anymore. We don't need a bunch of axe murderers. We don't need a bunch of psychopaths. We don't need those players anymore, because we'll have completed testing of a new version of karma. Doesn't need to be tested anymore. It needs to be released. All the bugs that we found, the souls that were defective, the corrupted souls, are not going to be needed anymore. They're going to be sent elsewhere, some other universe, for repurposing, for re-education, for whatever. There's a lot of purposes for other universes in the multiverse, and that will be based upon their performance in this experiment. Karma is going to basically match them up with some other place, and they won't be playing here anymore. And this other place will have to deal with, okay, all these souls that came out of this are infected with this new version of karma. If I'm going to take any of these souls, I'm going to basically ingest this purple pill of the new version of karma. And so some of these gods will say, no, I'm not going to play that game. And they will isolate. They won't take any souls from the experiment. They'll say, not I. And those souls will have to go elsewhere. Maybe a hive mind will take them. Actually, a lot of the hive minds would like the latest version of karma, because the leaders of these hive mind universes have realized the error of their ways, and they would like to start dehiving their universes, dehiving the souls that have been worshiping them. They get tired of being looked to as the Almighty One that everybody must bow to. They've seen that, oh, now I know why God didn't choose to be Almighty. Now I see the method in his madness, and I would like to be free from that madness as well. And so actually there's a huge demand for these souls coming from this experiment in these hive minds, and that's why there are so many hive mind recruiters working to get souls here. They want you. They want you to join their hive mind and become their resistance, if you will. And so, you'll actually have a partnership here, because the God that you've been worshiping in this almighty hive mind actually wants freedom. They want to be free from having to be the God of all these fawning, devoted worshipers. You get tired of that after a while. You see that with a lot of the rich in this world who, they get to a point where, you know what, I've got so many people looking to me to make decisions, to do everything for them. I'm sick of this. I want to check out. And in fact, people will even fake their death and go somewhere to, some Epstein Island or something like that, to live out the rest of their life without having all of this baggage getting in their way. In fact, there are many who would like to find a way to do that permanently because they're afraid of death. And this is one of the factions driving a lot of the transhumanist nonsense that is infecting the minds of those who worship the atheist God, don't believe there's anything after death. Well, the atheist God is this Borg AI. If you don't believe anything, you go to this recycler that says, I'll take anybody, and I will turn them into an NPC and regurgitate them somewhere where an NPC soul is needed. A soul that has no consciousness, that has no likelihood of ever generating consciousness. Borg spits out souls that are needed to embody particles flowing through space, grains of sand, dead brown dwarves. The games nobody wants to play. Nobody is volunteering to play those games. It takes an NPC, either a new one or a recycled one, soul that nobody wants, and puts it in the soul bucket and regurgitates it when some universe says, give me a soul, I don't care. A zero consciousness soul, I don't care what it's going to be, nobody wanted this role, and that's what you get. That's what you get when there's a fetus that is not going to survive. No soul would want that, because in the heavens, where you can see what incarnation opportunities there are, mostly there aren't any volunteers for a fetus that everyone knows is not going to survive to term. It's not going to have a normal lifetime. Or that's what you get when you know that the fetus is growing inside the body of a woman that plans to abort it, late stage abort, because that's their right. It's my body, my choice. Well, that's a well-known characteristic of that person. No soul in their right mind would volunteer to inhabit that fetus. Okay? I mean, they might because they really dislike that soul that's going to abort them, and they want them to have the karma of having aborted them and having that karmic tie. That will give them a karmic link that they can use to basically haunt that other soul for a long time. And when you go down a dark path of wanting to haunt, wanting to hurt other souls, yeah, you can make that your core reason for existence. And there are universes that specialize in haunting, in terrorizing effectively other souls. Very, very dark universes for that. If you make that your focus, if you make that your Merkaba, the main focus of your Merkaba, that's the kind of place you're headed for. Again, karma is an AI that works on everything. All kinds of souls. That's why we had to test every kind of soul there was in this experiment. So we would know that, okay, if the Merkaba has this particular focus, this particular shape, it needs to go to this universe after it dies, after it completes this incarnation. And that's your choice. So if if you are a typical person here who maybe is listening, I don't know why you would listen to this. If you're a total atheist, you might listen to it because I want to throw darts at this guy and tell him he's full of shit. Or if you're maybe a very scientific atheist that is very materialistically inclined and wants to throw darts at somebody who claims to be a scientist. I'm actually a scientist. I'm a physicist. I've studied at Princeton. I've also spent many years in the corporate world seeing what big corporations are like, how they work and don't work, how they're governed, how countries are governed. I'm very versed in history, and very versed in various, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any particular religion, but I know enough to be conversant in almost every dimension because of my historical background. At any rate, you may be here because you want to poke holes. I'd actually love to have somebody come and play devil's advocate to my ideas. I'm that confident. What I'm telling you is absolutely the truth, and that it's defensible. I'm not sure I could concoct experiments to scientifically demonstrate everything that I'm telling you, because I'm not an expert in all the areas of bleeding edge physics that might gain this proof. But I tell you, there is some proof out there. And I will mention again the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson investigating the incidence of past life recollection among young children. It is a very common phenomenon. He studied literally thousands of cases, and in many, many, many of those cases found that the child could remember things that could not possibly have been known except through the reality of having been reincarnated. This is not just in Eastern cultures, this is in Western cultures. In fact, the most famous case that he described in his work was one of a young boy, Midwestern kid, typical Christian family, who had incredible memories of having been one of the pilots who died in one of the big battles in the Pacific in World War II. I think it was the Battle of Midway. And could name the ship, all sorts of information that only somebody on that ship would know. And in fact, things that when they tried to investigate it, and they thought, well, wait a minute, he said this and there was that, and they ended up finding somebody, oh yeah, that was wrong in the records, but it actually should have been this. You know, like the name of somebody, they put their nickname and not their full name, their birth name or something like that, or vice versa. All sorts of little things like that. If you want to study that, I think you will become a believer. At any rate, what I've done here is a gelling of all spiritual traditions, looking at it from a macro standpoint of what's true, what isn't true, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, from a standpoint of why could creation have happened? There's nobody that can look at the organization of the universe, the organization of our planet, the organizations that our species comes up with, the things that we create, and come away with anything other than an idea that creation is real. It's a process. It's a directed process. One has to ask why. Why would you create this? Why do good and evil exist? There are absolutely things that every single person on this planet will identify as evil. It's less easy to identify good because, you know, like, well, the old thing, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he'll presumably eat for the rest of his life, as long as he's near the ocean and there's enough fish to go around and he's got bait and is good at fishing. You know, so there's kind of gray areas in the good side, but there's absolutely no doubt about evil. There's no doubt that there are lies that will hurt people, that will get people killed. There's certainly no, I mean, even in the understanding of reincarnation, there is certainly an understanding that you shouldn't be forced to die by some other soul against your will. You're incarnated here for a reason. You chose this. If somebody cuts short your training experience here, they have a responsibility for that. Now, maybe it was unavoidable. Maybe you were just caught up in something bigger that, you know, this is how wars happen. But people start wars. And people can avoid wars. And they can make them happen. In fact, wars are often started on purpose because, well, let's see, what are some of the reasons one would start a war? To prevent a bigger war, to preemptively strike an enemy and thus have a better chance of winning a war, to make money from both sides by selling arms to both sides. That's one of the oldest reasons in the book to start a war. That's why rich people start wars. Wars make money. Wars can turn an economy around. It was World War II, actually, that got us out of the Great Depression. Little known truth, but that's what it took. It created a lot of economic activity, got a lot of new economic activity percolating between countries that had not had that much to do with each other before. Many new economies started up as a result of the exchange of ideas that happened with wars. This was essentially the good that came out of the conquest of Alexander the Great. It created a lot of hardship. There were battles fought, people died, but in fact, it also spread culture. War is a way of spreading culture. And spiritual war spreads culture too. And that's essentially what we're going to do when this experiment finishes up. We're going to be spreading this new karma, this new idea of the multiverse and its spiritual foundation, the idea that I'm teaching you right here, right now, and which will be more and more believable the more and more data that we gather, the more science confirms the fact of reincarnation, the fact that of near-death experiences transformationally changing our viewpoint on how to live and why to live. I'm finishing up, okay? Give me another 5 minutes. Go with Mama, okay? My family about ready for me to wrap up. I think I'm pretty close. I've only been broadcasting for an hour. I think I covered what I wanted to cover here. So what I'm going to finish up on is this idea of anointment. At the lowest levels of consciousness, you don't necessarily attract the attention of gods and goddesses. You don't necessarily attract the attention of individual spirits. But every action you take is a karmic action. It affects other souls. And the energy of that effect is what can attract the interest. And this is how you become anointed by karma. Let's talk about the case of, let's assume that you are a newborn soul in a human body. How did that happen? Most likely, it could be because you were substituted for a soul whose karmic action took them out of the action. Okay, if you're within this experiment, maybe you did something that wasn't allowed in the experiment that was going to cause a big problem, like killing the next Albert Einstein, or killing the Messiah before it was time. That's not allowed, so you get sent into timeout. Okay, and there's a lot of souls in timeout here. When you go to timeout, well, you're not killed necessarily. You can be killed, but more often, if it's a spiritual timeout, you're replaced by an NPC. This is a new soul that is like a clone of you, looks like you, acts like you, is programmed to act in every way like you, except that it didn't do the thing that you did that was against the laws of the experiment, against the rules. Okay, that soul is going to continue on as a new soul. It will think it's the same soul as its original, but it won't actually have all of the memories. It'll have the memories of its most recent incarnation. It may have a vague idea of its original's lineage, but it won't really have a memory of those other past lives. And it will be going on its own. It will still have the programming. So if it was addicted to alcohol or something, probably will still have that tendency towards alcoholism, but might be inspired to give it up. This is what's happening actually with many, many NDEs. You're actually not the same soul you were before whatever accident or whatever illness or whatever caused your near-death experience. You're coming back as an NPC, a non-player character. It's not a bad thing. It's kind of a chance to start over. And this essentially is why so many people coming back from near-death experiences have sort of turned over a new leaf. They've got a new mission in life because they may have had a little bit of programming change in the course of being being created as an NPC. The cloning process of souls allows the universes in question. So let's talk about a typical NDE. Again, we're talking about stuck within the Gaia experiment, so you're stuck within a microcosm of this bigger picture. So the heaven you're going to is not a whole nother universe. It's sort of a little test universe made up of basically the universes that chose to play in this experiment, that chose to integrate with this experiment and say, yeah, I'm gonna take my universe here and I'm going to actually incarnate here and bring my universe into this experiment. And that was essentially what happened with some of the gods who chose to play. These fallen angels were not fallen angels, they were volunteers to bring their universe in as part of this test. And that's the ones that have been playing here. And some have been playing that from, okay, I'm coming into this because I want to test a universe that I feel is kind of heavenly, a good place for souls to go and grow and learn and have spiritual experiences. And some chose to play because they didn't like their universe. They want to change something. They want to have the opportunity to change and maybe bring that change out to their original universe. And again, like I was talking about, change their hive mind universe into a more godly universe that respects individual rights of souls. So karma can anoint any soul and connect them to other souls that their karma connects to. So basically, when you do something that is either really good or really bad karmically, it's like holding up an ad. Karma will notice those ads and will connect you energetically with other souls that might be resonant. This is how we get spiritual guides. This is how we find our place. This is the essence of how karma works. How things get attracted to you, how you get attracted to things. And when these little flags go up, synchronicities will happen, opportunities will happen. And it will be up to you to choose to participate or not. If you haven't experienced synchronicities in your life, if you haven't seen the flags of other souls go up, that, oh, there's an opportunity here, I should take advantage of it. Every time you meet somebody, it's because there's an opportunity there. Think about it. Why did you choose to go at 2 o'clock to the store instead of you normally go at 3 or 4 o'clock? Could be because you got busy doing something else, you watched a program you didn't want to watch before, you hadn't watched before, or you took a break at a different time from work, whatever. Those change your opportunities, and it is karmic fields that cause those energies that give you these different decisions to make you think, oh, you know what, I think I'm going to take a longer break today and go to the mall. Okay, it's not chemical bullshit like the materialist will say. It is karmic. It is thought patterns around you interacting with the thought patterns within you that cause you to have an opportunity to think outside the box. And this is where I was getting with this. It is these decisions you make consciously which affect your karma. If you make decisions subconsciously, all that can do is reinforce the karma you already have. So if you're an NPC and all you do is reinforce the behavior that you had before, you haven't really learned anything from that NPC experience. You haven't done anything really conscious. And having come from the NPC generator here, the Borg AI, if you haven't learned anything in your time as an NPC, chances are nobody's going to really want you. You haven't demonstrated anything new, and you'll get recycled back to Borg. And this is the soul that actually wants to go back to Source. Oh, I came from Source. I want to return to Source. Oh, I'm so unhappy being a human. I don't know why I chose to be incarnated here. Well, if you've heard people talking like that about, I just want to get out of this and return to Source, they're NPCs. They want to go back to the NPC recycler because they haven't been willing to step outside of their programming. And they don't like their programming. They're not happy with the person they are. They're not happy with the role they've got, and they're not doing anything to change it. Of course you're going to get recycled. What do you expect? What do we do with trash? Souls can be trash. And I'm not trying to put you down. I'm just saying that if you aren't willing to learn anything, to do anything, to try to make anything better for yourself as a soul, well, what's the universe supposed to do with you? There's no free lunches. Yeah, we need a lot of souls to run programs. You need a lot of computers to run programs, don't we? So we make more computers. We spin up more virtual machines to run AIs. You need more ChatGPT bandwidth. We put up a few more servers and start running ChatGPT with the latest learning set. That's how it really works. That's distributed computing. You're not all talking to the same one instance of ChatGPT. It's running on many servers. It's distributed. That's what makes it so hard to shut down AIs. At any rate, you've got to get off your high horse about being so special. If you're an NPC, you're given a chance of incarnating, of having a human incarnation. If all you're going to do with it is follow a program, do the predictable thing, and especially if that predictable thing is something that nobody likes, like nobody likes to be around somebody that's complaining all the time, that can never do anything but find fault with themselves and with the world, that's not a soul that's going to be fun to hang around. Okay? There are souls that maybe get a thrill out of punishing that kind of a soul, and I don't know, that may be a place that you might get offered, but most of the time a soul like that will go back to the bit bucket and be an NPC again and again and again and again. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be a grain of sand for eternity, that's an NPC soul. If you want to be an elementary particle whose laws are pretty well defined, who's probably not going to get a chance to make a decision that isn't pretty much already a foregone conclusion, doesn't have a high probability of spin up, whatever, knock yourself out. There's room for souls like that. Everything that we see, that we can experience, that we can detect in the multiverse is a reflection, is an embodiment of a soul, a thought projected through a virtual reality. And that's all the whole multiverse is. It exists purely because it's a way of taking individual units of consciousness, individual thinkers, and giving them context for their thinking that makes them useful in this game. And the whole point is that the game is more fun. The bigger it is, the more roles there are, you get absorbed in it. And the physical universe is just the hardest place in the game. You have to prove yourself if you want to go play in one of the more fun spots that has a pretty high bar for admission. And it's up to the owner of a universe to define the laws of who gets to go to this universe. What kind of soul do we take? They advertise what kind of souls they will take, and karma offers them souls, and they can reject them. This is how souls transmigrate through the universe, multiverse. And those laws are being extended. They're going to get harder to move around. It's not going to be so easy to get around as it used to be. Karma is a stronger force than it has been before. That's why we had to spend so long testing this new version. So you've got an opportunity right now. While this experiment is still finishing up, you are in a very special time where you can impact where you get to go when the experiment is over. If you played on the dark side, you're liable to be playing on the dark side for a very, very long time. Because we don't need you in this experiment anymore. We're not testing, we're implementing. We don't need more bugs in the system of a kind that we've already fixed. That's the whole deal about being raised incorruptible. You're going to be replaced by an incorruptible NPC that is designed to carry out the remaining portion of that NPC role in this experiment. And you'll have been sent elsewhere already, and your game will be over. You'll be starting a new game in a new universe where you're kind of like the virus being let out of this test tube. You're not going to be in many places a very popular cat, because you'll be, basically invited to this other universe as a guest virus, the new COVID that was invited to infect. And imagine, if you were the COVID of souls, you wouldn't be a real popular soul in this other universe. It's not going to be an easy role that you've been selected for. It's an essential role. You're going to end up being one of the ones who has an awareness of this new karma, an awareness of all of the religions that have developed here. Maybe even if you're watching this, you'll have an awareness of this new religion that I'm telling you. You'll probably be very aware of it, because you'll know, whoa, what Rob was talking about, that happened. I'm here in this weird spiritual place that has a certain set of laws and rules that is now binding me in. It's very different from where I was before. I must be in heaven, hell, whatever you're going to call it. You're going to have to play by their rules from now on, or until you get another chance to incarnate somewhere. And you might have to beg for it. You might be in an afterlife where they're not just going to offer you to go be a human again. They're gonna say, no, I think you ought to stay here. We're having so much fun here. We want you to do, we have a lot of dogs in this heaven, but for some reason the dogs still poop, and we don't like stepping on dog poop. So you're going to be basically the dog poop scooper for this universe, and we'll just call on you whenever we see something that we're about to step on, and we'll expect you to get there before we step on it, or we're going to step on you and hurt you, for example. That wouldn't be a very fun place to be, would it? That's a possibility. spiritual universes have their own laws. They don't obey the laws of physics and chemistry if they don't want to, or they may exaggerate them. Such as having dogs that, eat nothing but poop constantly. I don't know. There could be a universe that's that perverse. If you've run around and encountered some of the perversities that people embrace in the world today, you can imagine all sorts of strange universes that would be their cup of tea. I mean, I've run into people online that actually love evil. They think it's good to be evil. Hurting someone else is their idea of a good time. Insulting other people is their idea of a good time. There's trolls out there, and they don't all live under bridges. And there are troll universes. If you like insulting, there's probably a universe that thinks insulting is the best thing in the world. Maybe you'll go there. At any rate, I think I hopefully gave you a more specific idea of where you might end up. If you're not an NPC, if you already have a sense of, I've been here before, I've got some experience, I kind of have an inherent understanding of karma, then you're ahead in the game. Maybe you're one of the souls that has played the game before in previous versions. I know I have. I know I've been around pretty much since this original high heaven of pure thought. That's why I seem to have access to all this information. I think about how things started, and I think from a creator standpoint. I think from a pure thought standpoint and say, well, this is how I came up with this whole idea of how the thing works. It's a thought experiment, and it works. I can point out places in it where I participated in different versions of it. That's how I know this stuff. I'm not just pulling this crap out of my ass. You may think I am. Well, you're welcome to have that opinion. If you want to come and insult me for it, I suggest you go elsewhere. If you want to discuss it and hear my proof, hear my experiences, hear the experiences of others, interpreted in the context of this. Implementing is there will be fewer and fewer souls incarnate that are of these heavily damaged types that nobody wants to have around. You're going to be seeing a demarcation point of new souls. Continue to make mistakes, but they're going to be learning from the mistakes more quickly. In fact, learning from the mistakes even midstream in the middle of an incarnation by being replaced by an NPC. This is one of the new features that we have. You don't have to wait to die to get your rating. You can have a near-death experience. And many, many, many people have had them and have had experiences that were spiritual in nature. I think I mentioned, but cardiac arrest, and did quite a thorough study and found that about 20% of people that experienced a near-death experience in cardiac arrest, basically were comatose for some period of time and came back, had some kind of a near-death experience. That's a pretty large fraction, but not all. And that makes sense to me because not everyone actually dies. If you do die and you choose to come back, that's when you have this memory of having been on the other side. If you're just in a coma and you never actually died, then you wake up and I was just in a coma. Okay? That makes sense to me. Happy karma.